So I did want to ask you, and this isn't like a gotcha question, because I honestly, this is a question I ended up having after watching. I've seen this movie once. When does Mickey Prime die?
Welcome, friends, to episode 340 of the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book and then see the movie. I'm filmmaker James Bailey.
And I'm writer Luke Elliott.
And this week we discuss Bong Joon-Ho's 2025 film, Mickey 17. We went and saw Bong Joon-Ho's latest film. This is his follow-up to Parasite. You mentioned on our last episode you grabbed IMAX tickets. I went and saw it in IMAX as well. Great to be back in the theater. I like doing projects as they come out for the podcast. It's a lot of fun to experience it with an audience. And
like a new release.
Bong Joon-Ho, I love this filmmaker. I love his voice. I love him as a person. I've been watching a lot of interviews with him. He understands and speaks a fair amount of English, but the way that he switches back and forth between his native Korean and English, it's very charming to me. Like there's just there's so many things about this person that I love. And then it led into this film. I guess I don't want to say right away exactly how I felt about it. So I'll throw it to you. What was your experience like? And how did this film strike you?
Yeah. So agree, it's nice to get into the theater. I enjoy seeing stuff in IMAX. A little pricey, so sometimes it's hard to justify for every movie. And I think sometimes like the benefit of an IMAX versus a regular, especially because I don't think I have like the fake IMAX or whatever. Anyway, get into the weeds with that discussion.
Yeah,
but,
I'd love to talk about that.
We don't have access to like really good theaters here in Portland for whatever reason. There's no like true IMAX here, which is frustrating.
There are a few. I mean, there are Limax is what you're talking about.
Yeah.
There are some throughout the country. I'm sure there's some near you, probably Seattle, maybe, which is hours away, obviously.
Yeah,
but
not an easy drive for your regular movie.
I should probably look into it for your sake, but it's still fun to see it on a larger format, even if it is Limax.
Exactly, yeah. It's still better than your average experience, I think, but like, is it worth the extra $10-15 per ticket you're going to end up paying? Debatable.
Typically,
sometimes.
I think they're also guaranteeing a certain like sound quality, projection quality, like that sort of thing.
I appreciate the sound stuff a lot. I don't know, like maybe my hearing isn't as good as it used to be, but like I struggle sometimes in standard formats to hear. So I feel like the sound quality just isn't very good. It's not very loud. So sometimes I can't hear it, which I know other people complain that like IMAX movies are too loud for them. So it just depends on your experience, I guess.
Ours was absolutely massive screen. The speakers were shaking me to my core, which
Orlando
I
has
enjoyed.
Some crazy good theaters as far as that goes. Yeah.
But anyway, how did the film strike you in addition to your experience?
More importantly, how was the movie? So I think this was a good movie adapted from a good book. I do think both have flaws, and I think this is a really interesting case where both film and book sort of inform one another. I liked the experience of having read this book a lot going into the movie because I felt like it provided a lot of context and background and sort of filled in a lot of the blanks that the movie leaves open. And I'd be curious to hear from people who only saw the movie, like how much they found. They had like questions about like how things work and about the technology and about the society that is shown, because a lot of it is, necessarily so for a faster runtime movie, and I mean faster than like a book. You just have to cut some stuff, and they did. They also changed a good amount, and I think it's interesting to see where the changes were made and for what purpose. We can try and theorize, and it's just it's one situation where I feel like. The book and the movie each are sort of they're a reflection of one another. Each shows sort of strengths in certain mediums, their respective mediums. But I think it also shows there was a push to emphasize certain aspects of the story by Bong Joon-Ho that really comes across in the film version.
And if you're new here, we cover the book, which we did last week, Mickey 7, and then we cover the film in response to that. We talk often about like the inherent aspects of a medium. In a novel, a sci-fi novel, you're going to get a lot more of those things that a film just doesn't have time to flesh out. We get a lot about Mickey's past lives in the book. We get a lot about the overall like kind of structure of this like governing body and some of the stuff that's been off from that. And I think a lot of that is left kind of in the peripheral in the film.
And some of it has changed. Admittedly.
Yeah, and some of it has absolutely changed. This film does an interesting job of like honing in on something that I think especially tone wise. Like I think the tone of the book, it was funny. I was enjoying it. I thought it was pretty tongue in cheek in some ways, and pointing to like abuse of like a working class system where like working class individuals are, you know, taken advantage of by a larger system. But that was kind of like background. I think this film really comes in and centers that and makes it a lot about like maybe some of the political situations that we're seeing in our everyday lives.
Oh yeah.
Right now, and that does change it in a significant way.
So I want to say we're gonna stay as spoiler free as we can for a little while here, since this is a new release. We like to try and talk in spoiler free ways, but we're gonna make some, you know, like comparisons, talk about certain characters that were introduced and changed, and some of that is like at least lightly spoilering. We just won't be getting to like what eventually happens with them. But I mean, I think we can go ahead and say Mark Ruffalo is a character here, a version of this Marshall character, and it's quite a different take on this character. And it really highlights the system you're talking about, and it situates Mickey to be this, like, I mean, he was in the book too, but really this, like, blue-collar protagonist hero who is getting sort of just chewed up by this capitalist hellscape that he lives in. And I think that really works here, and I think that is something that Bong Joon-Ho is very attracted to, and it makes sense with his, I mean, what I know of his filmography, I feel like it makes a lot of sense.
I mean, it absolutely does. He loves looking at the systems. He likes looking at the absurdity of it in ways, and power dynamics. And yeah, I mean, just to talk about Ruffalo, like, what a fucking insane performance from Mark Ruffalo. Like, you know, it kind of harkens back to his role in Poor Things. Like, that's what I immediately thought of when I saw this film. How unhinged that character could be at times.
Yeah,
and then this character is obviously like, I mean, to me at least, and it's funny because Bong Joon-Ho would disagree, as I think you just would in general as an artist, like reflecting some of your world. But it's like, what a crazy moment in time with all the stuff going on with Elon and Trump, to have a character like this, like so centered and so like farcical, but also like too close to home in a way.
He's an interesting sort of nexus for this movie, where I think a lot of your takeaways might be on how you feel about this character. I am a certifiable Trump hater, as is James in this podcast. We have the Trump derangement syndrome, as people like to say. Had that for a long time, proudly so. Hate him, and yet this character is clearly like a reflection of him. I heard Ruffalo was on Fallon. I didn't watch a lot of stuff, but I did see this clip. My wife sent it to me, actually, where he was saying that they shot this 3 years ago, and he plays this petty dictator. And he was like, at the time, he's like, this may be a little on the nose, maybe a little over the top. And then now he's like looking at stuff and saying, like, I actually don't know if I went far enough. Sort of tongue in cheek.
Well, and that's the weird thing, how like fiction is kind of mirroring the real world, because like this was written obviously with some of those tones in mind, but then with the Trump presidency starting, and then the Elon stuff obviously layering onto that with all of his conflicts of interest and other things that we can talk about, but that and like there's a borderline like Roman salute, quote unquote Roman salute in this film that like, I mean, they had to have shot a year or two ago.
3 years ago, supposedly shot. So yeah,
and the film was like originally supposed to release in 2024. So it's like been delayed due to some of the editing and this and that. And so like it's crazy to see like this was meant to be more subtle than I think the political landscape right now is allowing it to be.
It made it to where this character really isn't subtle. And I don't know. I guess I'm mixed about it.
Subtle might not even be the right term, but like more nuanced than it seems.
So he's basically Donald Trump meets a like televangelist, which Donald Trump kind of is that too, but like you're really emphasizing the sort of religious nature of it, at least that being used, and how cultish the followers are. And they literally that's the whole setting for this, and it feels so recognizably present and like true to life right now in our country that I don't know. It's like, it's almost too much, because it's almost too on the nose. And I don't know. I had a weird response to it, because like it's something that I should really, really like, but it was like too identifiably Trump to me, to where it was kind of taking me out of it a little bit. Like I kept seeing Ruffalo doing Trump in the performance, and that didn't let me like believe Marshall as this real character, and instead I saw the Trump performance going on. I
totally get that, and I had a piece of that. I think I enjoyed it a little more because I was like kind of reveling in the fact that this is a Korean filmmaker
Sure.
that's commenting on American politics possibly, and like the way that that is also coming into play. And overall, like, I just thought, like, as far as a Ruffalo performance, like, say what you will about exactly what he's portraying, but like, he's unhinged. He's really,
Yeah.
I think he's really funny in a lot of the scenes, and very hateable.
Definitely funny. I did want to also reference when you talked about his Poor Things character. I can see some of the unhinged nature being a comparison point, but I found that character had something likable at his core that made me, even though he was kind of terrible in his own way for sure, it was more complex. I had more complex feelings about him, where this is just a straight up villain that you absolutely hate.
Yeah. The only complexity that I would say about Mark Ruffalo's character is the addition of Toni Collette's character.
Yeah.
And like their love story, their weird fucking love
She
story.
was also just really fucking terrible. I mean, not performance, but the character was really hateable.
I think really funny, interesting, like, I mean, not very nuanced, but like really to see these top tier actors portraying characters like this, and she's so lost in the sauce, man. I wanted to say that so bad. She's so wrapped up in her sauce.
Yeah.
It's fucking,
like
and it's kind of funny what the sauce can represent when we start digging into that as well.
That's hilarious. Yeah, she is obsessed with sauce. But I wanted to throw it back at you a little bit. So Robert Pattinson is also, I think, going to be one of the biggest sort of things that determines how much you like this movie and his performance that he gives. And I've seen people saying he plays a weird little goblin man in this movie.
Absolutely, and I like it.
I wanted to ask you how you felt about this version of Robert Pattinson. It's very different than I think we've seen him in, at least anything I've seen him in.
Well, there's two Robert Pattinson roles.
It's true. I mean, there's more than two, but yeah, two primary ones. Yeah.
But like we'll talk about 17, which is the main character.
Yes,
of the film.
that's the main character that we follow the most. Yeah,
I actually really like the accent that he adopted. I like this meek nature. I like to see actors kind of go against typing. I just thought it was really fun, and he believably playing two characters, at least to me. He had the 18 role, which is like, you know, I would say completely different, but this Mickey 17 character, and like how you're pulling for the character, I think a lot of what the framework that was set up in the novel carries through here. But he's also, you mentioned last week, like, you used the term a fool.
Yeah.
And
the character from the book I thought was, I think I said a fuck up, but I also said fool. Yeah, I think that was present here. I think they really tapped into that.
They cranked that up even, I would say, way more. And in this, he's like kind of a simple-minded person that you know is kind of just like almost a child at times, and I think there's something funny about that, but it does take away from Mickey, I think, in terms of like his agency.
Yeah, he seems like he's just kind of caught up in everything. Like, he really doesn't understand anything.
In the book, I felt like, while he's a fool and he makes some bad decisions, he did still have like sort of some kind of compass. And I think some of that some of an arc that 17 may have been going on was given to maybe 18, which we can dig into once we get there.
Okay, yeah, we can hold some of that for true spoiler talk. I guess the other thing is that, like, I liked there was elements of the world that were really leaned into to set up this tone, which is like darkly satirical. Had a kind of, and I picked this up in a little bit in the book too, but it had a little bit of a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy sort of vibe to it at times, but with like a really dark satirical.
I was gonna say, I don't think it goes quite so whimsical.
Not quite so whimsical, but at times it can get pretty whimsical. But it keeps kind of this uncomfortable undercurrent that colors everything. But it also, like, it's trying to like not take itself too seriously and sort of show that we're going to play a little fast and loose at times with the science here, and that's okay because we're telling a weird sci-fi story that has a message, that has a social message. And that's the thing I want to applaud this film most for. In a time where we see a lot of like safe decisions by Hollywood, a lot of especially for big budget things, right? We're seeing a lot of sequels, seeing a lot of remakes, and you know, sometimes those can work, but sometimes they don't. I think a lot of people would agree that we're seeing a lot of that out of Hollywood. So I want to applaud a movie that comes in and says, this is going to be a fucking weird world. It's going to be a big swing, and we're going to have this sci-fi story that is odd as hell, but has a message at its core, and is saying something meaningful, I think. So I want to give it all kinds of credit for that, because despite little quibbles I'll have here and there, I want to see more movies like this in that sort of like risk-taking mode. I like to see this sort of thing.
And as you see filmmakers like Bong Joon-Ho, who can strike a chord with audiences in a way like Parasite did. And we covered Snowpiercer on the podcast
Yeah.
too. So if you want more about Bong Joon-Ho, Snowpiercer, I think we
Great
talked about it
movie.
a little bit. Some overlap in terms of like social hierarchies and some of the other things that Bong Joon-Ho likes to dig into with his work.
Another off the wall sort of wild sci-fi concept. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's awesome, right? Like we want to see more of this, and maybe it's not for everybody, and maybe it doesn't like necessarily hit as like the most life-changing thing we've ever seen from Bong, but he's the kind of filmmaker that's getting like final cut, right? Like, so at the end of the day, say what you will, it seems that there's not very much studio input or meddling in these scenarios. And I think you get like a more pure vision from someone like this. And then let's just talk about visually. This movie looks incredible.
Looks
so
good,
much
yeah.
of it is really striking. Really great use of colors. The set design was really cool.
Yeah.
I saw like all that snow was like apparently the most salt that was ever used for a set. It was
Really
just salt
interesting.
on all over the ground. And
That seems like that would be almost, I don't know, dangerous, because salt is like you don't want to get salt
Corrosive.
all over you.
Corrosive, yeah. It's just like kind of one of the things that you can use as a rather than snow, which is cold and wet. But it's interesting because sometimes when they're shooting, there is actually like an open bay door above them where they were shooting in England that was like allowing snow to come in. So it's actually like mixing in there. So what you're seeing is some snow, some salt. But I thought notable because it was the most salt that had ever been used on a set like that.
Wow.
And it looks really good. I mean, the
looked good,
pure
yeah.
white, I think like a kind of powdery look. A lot of the sci-fi elements. We talked about like the corpse hole last week, which is actually like the cycler, I think is the other name that I couldn't think of last week.
Cycler, yeah.
And these creatures, which I don't want to talk too much about, but they're creepers.
Yeah.
And though they have a cool design that I like a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting, like sci-fi, very Bong Joon-Ho design to a creature. The look of the printer looks very cool. Like
Yeah.
all of that laboratory stuff looks really cool for a sci-fi film.
I like the little repeated gag of like as he's coming out, he like stops and comes back in and then goes back at it, like like
I
how
love it,
actual
yeah.
printers do.
Well, and we'll get into this, but I think it's heavily implied that like some of the misprinting that's happening may lead to some of what we get with other characters that appear in the film. Yeah, and then like there's this bizarre dinner sequence. It's quite gross at times too. Like
Yeah.
I like that like we get like a little bit of grossness, some sweetness. Oh, that's another thing we should absolutely talk about is Nasha's character. Because we talked about it in the book episode. How do we feel about the adaptation
Yeah.
of her character? And there was something you specifically highlighted, like
Yeah.
you wanted to see more from some
Yeah,
of these.
I wanted to see more from her. I felt like they gave her more to do, made her have more of an arc, made her more interesting. I definitely liked this version of the character more. I still maybe have some quibbles that I'll bring up once we get into spoiler sections, but like overall, I really liked her character, and the changes that were done with her in general were positive, I think. Yeah.
I felt the same way. I felt like it kind of grew her character a little more, showed more of like the motivation and like the reason why she acts the way that she does, and gave her some more like kind of cool and fun stuff to do. So I see Bong like kind of developing more and more as a filmmaker. Like he has like films like The Host and Memories of Murder from earlier in his career, and then we get like Bong Joon-Ho with Snowpiercer into Parasite eventually, and now we're getting like Okja was in there as well. And I'm starting to see like the kinds of stories that he wants to tell and the kinds of concepts he wants to tap into. I was surprised that like the use and the idea, some of the existential nature of kind of cloning technology was less on display than I was expecting. There was more in the book, and in this I thought it was going to be even more. I thought we would really dig into the psyche of the characters, and almost less of that because it's more about some of the political stuff that we're talking about into like and maybe even some of the, like the anti-colonialism messaging. It's centered on that, less so on some of the headier sci-fi kind of like Ship of Theseus stuff we talked about last week in the book.
Yeah, some of that stuff just kind of gets a nod. I think it's left in the margins of the movie to where when you're thinking about it after the fact, you might start having a bunch of these questions. It's like, wait a minute, how do I feel about this and that? But I agree that's one of the things when I was talking about how I think the book really helped and like played off of this movie in an interesting way and vice versa, to where like if you saw this movie and you have more questions about the tech and what sort of philosophical conundrums and paradoxes that arise from this, I think there's more of that in the book, and that's one of the things that the book can provide for you. to where it would be worth checking it out.
And that leads to the change of the title and the change of some of the background of what happens before the film begins. Mickey 7 was the book, Mickey 17 is the film. So 10 more iterations, and like what that can do, and the thinning of the character that kind of comes with each death. It feels I think that was meant to represent that in some way. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also a smart way to differentiate the movie from the book. There, admittedly, in the book, there's a lot of ways of dying discussed, and yet we are only on Mickey 7, and I always felt like that was a little low. So I think maybe that also could be part of it. It's just like we read about all these different ways that the Expendables are supposed to die, and yet we're only on Mickey 7. So it seems like some of it's theoretical, and I think Bong Joon-Ho looked at it and said, like, I just want to have our Mickey go through all of this, and we'll see this happen many, many times. And so the movie's able to do that, and it also kind of represents some of the way that like a lot of this stuff is just kind of amped up. And so I think the Expendable program has been amped up to an extent, right? I think we're dancing around many spoilers here, so apologies if this was a little too spoilery for you all. But we're gonna move into talking a little more about the behind the scenes stuff, a little bit more about the creation of this film, and then we'll get into full spoilers.
So one question that we had, or something that we brought up last week with the Mickey 7 book, is how did Bong Joon-Ho come to this kind of smaller scale story, something that in terms of what you told me wasn't necessarily a smash hit. It was well regarded, but it wasn't something that like a lot of people had seen. So this Korean filmmaker finds it and gets a hold of it, and I'm going to tell you about that. So Bong Joon-Ho became interested in directing Mickey 17 after reading the manuscript for Edward Ashton's novel Mickey 7 before it was published in 2022.
So how did it get in his hands? Is this just like wizardry by the agent getting it to this director? Like, how does this happen?
I don't know. I assume that there are just like he has representatives who are out seeking Bong Joon-Ho-esque stories, and they're
props to the literary agent for being tied into it, because I assume they are the one who are able to make this happen. What a awesome series of events to get that happening for an author like
Edward Ashton. Just has to be over the moon about all this.
Has to be. I'd love to ask him about this, honestly.
Yeah, definitely. So Warner Brothers had acquired the rights to the book early, and Bong, known for his keen eye for unique and thought-provoking narratives, was drawn to its blend of existential sci-fi, dark humor, and ethical dilemmas. Given his success with films that explore class struggles and identity, Mickey 17's themes of cloning, expendability, and human consciousness resonated with his storytelling sensibilities. After reading the manuscript, he quickly decided to write and direct the film himself, reworking it into Mickey 17.
Love that, man. It totally makes sense. In like reading that, I could see all of that, like why this would work. I just can't help but feel like there's probably a lot of other books out there that have similar themes that could have appealed to him. So again, it's just cool that this was one that actually made it to him.
And so Bong, after he wrote it, apparently Robert Pattinson, and I'm always curious about this, like, are they just saying this in hindsight? But apparently Robert Pattinson was always the first actor that came to mind for the performance.
Yeah, it's like the NFL. Sorry, momentary aside about the NFL, but like where GMs will always say like he was our top prospect on the board, no matter who it is, and like when they take him, they pick him at 25. He was our top player on our entire board.
We got our guy.
Yeah,
and Robert Pattinson was this guy for this film, and it worked. I think, like we've already talked about, it's cool to see him playing against type. I think he carries a lot of weight as an actor these days. Like he's a far cry from his Twilight days. He's really earned, I think, his status, and it's cool to see him in this. And apparently Robert Pattinson had a fair amount of input in the film. Like he improvised a bunch of lines from Mickey 18 as his personality sort of unfurls before us, and then kind of just like colloquial humor and knowledge of slang and things like that like Bong Joon-Ho wasn't necessarily like aware of. He was able to bring to the character. And funny enough, I saw that Pattinson used inspiration from a bunch of characters, but specifically one that I picked was Jim Carrey in Dumb and Dumber. Was the one that he used for Mickey 17, which I think you can see that, man. I think another that I saw in an interview, I saw him speaking about, he was kind of trying to evoke like sort of the reactions of like anime characters at times, like the almost like nonsensical ways that they will like over emote in ways and things that they'll do, kind of one emotion to the next, I guess, like the juxtaposition of that and the changing of that. Cool to see an actor kind of talk about his process in that way, and channel things that he clearly likes and is a fan of. Oh, I also heard that he was channeling Ren and Stimpy, the animated show. Did you ever watch any of that?
I did, yeah.
Yeah.
I wasn't a big fan, but I remember that was one of those that would like disturb me whenever I saw it as a kid.
Me too, but yeah. I was a fan. I enjoyed that kind of weird shit. And then in the initial script reading, he imitated the voices of Johnny Knoxville and Steve-O from Jackass.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
Bong told him not to do the Steve-O impression. The film's creepers were designed by Bong and Jong Hee-chul, who have been collaborating since 2006 to create monsters and creatures for Bong's movies. Since I think The Host is the first time they collaborated in 2006.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, they were good. I don't want to get into spoilers with them, but I will just say that there was an attempt around the baby ones to make them cute.
Absolutely.
And I think that works, and it's interesting. We can talk about why they did that.
I think I know what you're getting at, but the other thing that my fiance Caitlin mentioned is that they look like the creatures from Nausicaa, the Valley of the Wind.
Oh yeah, I can see that a little bit. Yeah,
and I was like, you're totally right. They look a lot like that. That's sort of like almost I don't know, roly poly look.
Yeah. The big slugs.
Yeah. So just a couple other things with the production to note. Bong Joon-Ho is the type of director that with this film, he storyboarded everything beforehand. And I think that's always good to note for filmmakers. I find that to be an interesting data point because putting in that level of pre-production is always seems like it's going to provide so much. And it's brave, I think, too, because like you are effectively creating a film from your office or wherever you're working from. And it kind of makes me think about some of the process that writers go through, right? Like you're
Sure.
often on your own, writing and creating a world, and storyboarding is a cool process in that way. And then obviously like the visualization of that. And I'm not saying he drew the storyboards necessarily. I'm sure there was other collaborators there with him, but that's a process that I think is like underutilized in some cases. I think like some films could use some more planning. I think this film looks the way that it does because of a fair amount of planning and expertise.
There's a fundamental difference that I can imagine in those two actions, right? Because as a writer, one thing you're not doing is situating the camera. And in fact, one of the criticisms that we'll often have to hit like newer writers with is to say, this feels like you are imagining a camera, and we need to instead place you in a character, usually, or sometimes you're omniscient. But either way, you want to be... I like to write my stuff, and I like to read stuff where I feel situated in a character's experience. An experience, encompassing all the senses. So you train yourself to imagine scenes from the point of view of like an embodied character. Like so that's how I try and write. As a director, I imagine you're instead looking at this material and you're saying, how can I make this look on camera? And you're imagining what kind of shots you might use, where you might position things, what kind of color grading you might use, what kind of sound design. You're thinking about the whole process, but you're thinking about the end result and what you're going to show on a screen. And so it's just like a fundamentally different process, but it kind of shows that, your mind's gonna have to work different ways as you're thinking about a three-dimensional space, you're thinking about set design, you're thinking about positioning a camera.
And it's interesting too to note, like the writing process of a screenplay is often the advice is don't do any camera direction in your screenplays. People don't want to read that in screenplays. A director picking up a screenplay doesn't want to be told where they're going to put the camera, all that kind of stuff. And then eventually they look at the beats, they look at the story, and then they figure out visually. That's another step in the process, is that they go in and they do their storyboarding process or their shot lists. Yeah, it's good to note like the difference in those two things. But Bong Joon-Ho here was the writer and director. So, he's gone through the gamut of that process.
So he adapted the screenplay himself.
He did.
Yeah,
yes.
That's cool.
Yeah. One more thing that you mentioned too is like the look of the film and the sound design and a lot of that stuff is like, while the director has a vision on that, often that comes through a heavy amount of collaboration as well.
Right. Like you're going to bring in a cinematographer, you're going to bring in different people. And that's one of the fundamental differences between the mediums is that, especially big movies like this, it's very collaborative. And even I think as fundamental as like the performance aspect of it, right? Like you bring in Robert Pattinson, he's improvising things, he's bringing his own spin on the performance, and all of a sudden now it's a collaboration between you and your star actor. So that happens all the time in film.
Speaking of Robert Pattinson and that collaboration with an actor and a director, I also read while Pattinson was heavily involved that there were times that Bong insisted on filming key scenes without Pattinson knowing which version of Mickey he was playing until just before shooting.
Interesting.
Which seems like cruel to me in a sense, because an actor wants to, so often prepare.
Maybe he's trying to blur the lines a little bit between
I
them,
think
though.
that's a part of it. And I did read this method was meant to capture the confusion and existential dread of a clone struggling with his own identity, leading to some of the film's most unsettling and raw performances, which I think you do get some of that. But at the same time, I think that you trust your performers in a sense, but who am I to tell Bong what to do? I'm sure he had a method, and I'm sure he wasn't doing it at all times. It sounds like certain times, like maybe he'd be like, all right, we're going to film this. We're going to maybe jumping back and forth between characters, that kind of thing. Like just on the busyness of a set.
There is an element of some psychological manipulation that goes on from directors, and it's not like, this doesn't seem to me harmful in any way. And it's clearly like, it's kind of like the same stuff coaches do in sports, right? It's like you're trying to get something out of your players, or you're trying to get something out of your actors here. And you trust them to perform, but like if you're trying to get a very specific confusion or specific like untethered feeling where you don't quite know who you are, you can use a manipulation like this, because it does feel like a little bit of manipulation to try and like bring that out sort of organically, rather than just trusting it to be able to happen from the performer.
As we move into the plot here, I just want to revel in the fact that Mickey 17 has brought a lot of sports metaphors into play, and I didn't expect that to be happening, but here we are.
I've been rewatching some Ted Lasso recently, and it has me thinking about coaching.
All right, there you go. Believe. I'm gonna smack the poster.
Yeah.
All right, it's time to move into spoilers now. Check out if you are worried about spoilers. If not, come along for the journey.
And we are going to be, at the end of this episode, judging whether or not we like the book or the movie better. So definitely stick around for that.
So in the year 2054, Mickey Barnes and his friend Timo are financially destitute after a failed business venture. Unable to repay a murderous loan shark, the pair flee by signing up as crew for a spaceship that leaves Earth to colonize the planet Niflheim. Timo as a shuttle pilot, and Mickey as the spaceship's only expendable. Using Earthband technology to clone Mickey and restore his memories, Mickey is treated as disposable, given lethal assignments, and regenerated after death. During the voyage, a romance develops between Mickey and security agent Nasha. 4 years later, the spaceship arrives at snowy Niflheim. Using several Mickeys sequentially, the spaceship's scientists develop a vaccine against Niflheim's pathogens. Mickey 17 is tasked to capture Niflheim's caterpillar-like life form, Creeper, for analysis. He falls into a fissure in the ice beyond the reach of Timo, who leaves and reports Mickey 17's death. The Creepers arrive and collectively push Mickey 17 out of the fissure.
Yeah, so this is both the beginning and sort of middle of, or like at least end of the first act, right? Like we get a sort of in media res, we see this happening at the start. He's in the fissure already, he wakes up, and he's being left for dead. And this is the same way the book opens. And I thought this is a great scene. It's a good opening for the book. It works well as an opening for this movie. And then we're going to backfill with some like, how did we get here? And we end up treading that ground. This all worked for me. It introduces a lot of new elements with the way that Earth is portrayed, which we noted in our book episode that Earth is not where Mickey is from. He's from Midgard. He, in fact, is never been to Earth. That's changed here. I think that requires me a little more explaining on the point of, on the part of a movie, and something that he probably just didn't want to get into. It's easier to just say Earth here. But that's sort of is a precursor to other things that are like not explained as well as they explain them in the book, and it's sort of we don't go as far, and some of that I did kind of miss from the book. And then Nasha, I think a fundamental change to Nasha's character is to have her be a romantic interest from the jump with Mickey Prime. Mickey Prime does not meet Nasha in the book. It is Mickey 3. It's the first time they meet. And I think that creates an interesting difference, because the heart of their relationship and their romance, I think you can look at it as say like, oh, she fell in love with the original Mickey, and now all these versions are a continuation of that relationship. But you set the paradox at the heart of it instead, where you say they didn't even meet till Mickey 3, so she never knew Mickey Prime. Do we still feel the same way about the relationship? And I like the way that Edward Ashton like set that up and made us ask how we feel about it.
Right. And then there's the whole thing about like people seeking out expendables because there's like a fetishization.
Yeah, the ghost chasers. That wasn't really talked about. I mean, it was kind of hinted that maybe, but it was. You also could just read it as like he's attractive, so maybe that's why people are coming on to him.
I think it changes it a little bit, but I also think that Nasha's character, like it gives Nasha a reason to be in from day one. Like how people were treating him poorly because he was an expendable, even when he was Mickey Prime.
Yeah.
And I think that she was there to be somebody to both protect him and also like share joy with. Like clearly, like their early scenes is they're laughing together and you can see their relationship budding some. She seems like a character that has more like mama bear energy in this.
Yes. Yeah.
Like she's like very protective, and I think she was in the book as well. But here, I think it's endearing as like a character trait for her because she is kind of like this badass. I think she's not a pilot in this one though. She's a pilot in the book.
Yeah, I think she's like a security officer or something. Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's
Basically a
cool to
cop.
see like how much she cares about him, and it's so emphasized like how she's the only person who gives a shit about him on the ship. And that's obviously from the book, but also not quite as emphasized. And I felt like it was more naturally progressing.
Their sexual relationship was definitely funny, and the like stick figures and like the they're joking about it, looking at the tablet, and then that ends up coming back at the end of the movie and being clutch. Like, that was really fun. That was really fun. That's all from the movie, movie invention. It was really hilarious.
Got to be the most shocking reveal of like him signaling to her, but
Bring the baby or whatever.
Yeah, bring the baby. Wild. Bong Joon-Ho is awesome for that.
Yeah. So I did want to ask you, and this isn't like a gotcha question, because I honestly, this is a question I ended up having after watching. I've seen this movie once. When does Mickey Prime die?
On the planet, right? On Niflheim?
To what?
Oh, wait, no. He was out in space before that.
He was in space.
Yeah.
But what was the circumstance around his first death?
His arm gets cut off.
That's the first one where they're sending him out there in the radiation and stuff?
I think so. No?
Maybe. This is my point. There's an answer, I'm sure, but like I thought it was kind of unclear. And what's strange about that is, once again, I brought this up in the book episode, I think that's the most important death. Because if you believe that Mickey dies and that these are clones and that original Mickey Prime is dead, I want to know when Mickey Prime died and how did he die? You
talked about in the book episode that like that was the most important death of the Mickey's death.
And in the book, it's a heroic death. He dies to save the ship. Like it's a big heroic moment for him, and I felt like it was like, okay, yeah, of course, if you're in a situation where you're going to get reprinted and somebody's going to have to die, is basically what's set up. It's like somebody's going to have to sacrifice themselves to save this ship. So of course it's going to be you. Like you would volunteer if you had this thing set up because you're like, I don't know, if you're like at least like somewhat heroic, you're going to think about that. But here I felt like he was just one of the deaths. And in fact, they made it kind of unclear to me which one was him. Because we jump around in time a little bit. There's like the testing of the different diseases. There's the testing of the there's like a nerve gas. There's the radiation. And it seems almost like they're just putting him out there to see what space radiation does to him. I was unclear that he was actually doing anything important. I didn't think that was established.
Yeah, actually, you're right. Because they're asking, like, what are you feeling? And all that kind of thing.
If that's Mickey Prime, that's fucked up. Just go out into space. We'll see how it feels to die. That's your first time. Like, I'd rather do the actual, because they have the same test is put in there where she hands him the gun. Although I think she holds it up to his head here instead of handing it.
She pulls the trigger instead of him pulling the trigger.
Instead of him, which like that, I didn't like that because like that made sense for me in the book. Like you got to show that you're committed to this project, but then they don't want to like waste the sort of materials around printing a body if they don't have to. But I kind of think both of them don't go far enough because it actually would make a ton of sense for you to kill yourself and show your belief in the system. Because otherwise, Mickey Prime, once again, it becomes very important when they actually die. Because that first death is going to be the hardest.
I do think, too, with the space radiation, I think it was pretty fucked up. Because if I remember correctly, he was out there. And they were like, by the way, you're taking on all this radiation right now. Deadly radiation is hitting you. And they're just like, yeah. But I think also it's the tone of the film. The way that the film wants you to see death and Mickey's regenerations is supposed to be light until it's not. And like even the first one, they're like, don't worry about it. It's like they want you to be along for the ride. Like, oh, he's going to get printed a bunch of times.
It was like they were aiming this movie towards a common audience that maybe wouldn't be as interested in these kind of questions. And I just personally would have liked a little more engagement with that. Because I think the existential question of this is like the selling point of the movie. Like that's I want to like touch it on that and talk about it. Talk about the teleporter paradox and not just lip service. I want to get into that. And we do, but it's kind of left at the at the seams, right? It's left for you, like when you're talking about with your friends after the fact, you might start touching on that. But like the movie itself, I mean, I don't want to say like barely engages with it, but at times it feels like it sort of just jumps right past it. It's like, oh, it's just a given that this is how it works. And okay.
I think you can take it one of two ways. You can think that Bong trusts an audience to kind of go through all of that on their own. Or you can say he skipped over it because he wanted to focus on other things because of the length of the film.
I could see it maybe also like test audiences, maybe it's like, this is a little dry or this.
I don't know if it's that kind of film. No, I don't think that he's going to test audiences to see what's working. Like I don't know. That not from anything I'm seeing as far as the creative process.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I don't want to level that if that's not how it goes. But and that does bring me to another thing though. The nature of the uploads, the memory uploads. Something that I felt like Edward Ashton did a really good job of describing when the last upload was, when each version of Mickey would die. And in fact, we get a whole sequence where Mickey is refusing to upload the current sort of pain he's going through because he doesn't want the new version of him to have that memory. And so we see like a deliberate manipulation of that, and we start to see differences in the Mickeys could potentially be arising from that. Like that version of myself died and experienced, at least several hours or even a week of like trauma that he didn't want me to have. So we start to see this like differences sort of organically appearing in the different Mickeys. My wife asked me at the end, like, wait, so how do the uploads work? Does he remember all of those moments? And like, it's a fair question in the movie because I think they talk about it like once that he has to upload, but like it's unclear. Is he doing that all the time in the movie? Is he supposed to remember everything that happens? I think it's a little unclear in the movie.
I think you'd be forgiven for missing what I think is the point where it's talked about. And there's that time. So you can think of the moment when he's like inside of the chamber being exposed to he's got that like helmet looking thing on.
Yeah.
And at some point he says like he didn't want to wear it anymore. He didn't want to remember it in a similar way to what happens in the book.
Yeah.
So I think the only time that we know that he's like backing up his memory is when he's wearing that like cap looking thing.
Okay.
And outside of that, at some point he's like, I'm not doing that anymore. So I don't know when. It's not clear when he's uploading after any of that.
Yeah. And I think that, again, maybe that's in there if you're really watching for it. But I think, just first time viewing, you could be forgiven to like completely not understanding when the uploads are happening and what he actually remembers. Because she asked me, like, does he remember any of the deaths? Because, like, it's unclear. Like, why would they upload that, right? And are they uploading that all the time? Or does he remember all of them? Because he doesn't remember stuff about 17. Like, 18 doesn't remember stuff about 17. So it's a little, again, like, the book does a little bit better job of explaining how this tech works. In the movie, it's just kind of like, just go with it.
Visually interesting, that like weird brick that they use to, they're like,
brick.
oh, it's a supercomputer. I was like, okay, cool. Future alien tech. But the other thing we need to talk about before we move on is the Timo stuff. And Steven Yeun, who I absolutely love. I think he was in Okja, and he was great in like Minari and Walking Dead.
Yeah, I remember him from Walking Dead for sure, yeah.
He's awesome. Dude, Beef, if you've seen Beef.
I haven't seen Beef, no.
Oh, it's great. And anyway, I was really happy.
I will say I got Beef and The Bear mixed up for a long time, but I've finally seen The Bear now, which I love. Have not yet seen Beef, but you can see why I might mix those two up.
Definitely, yeah. They're both great, so both worth watching. But Steven Yeun here is playing a kind of a fucking asshole, right?
Yeah.
Maybe a bit against type for him, although I may have seen him do a similar kind of role.
He's a version of this, was it Berto character? Is that what his name was? Yeah.
He shows up and he's like... eventually he's like kind of a drug dealer for this some kind of accelerant or something, or
it's like an oxy thing, like, right? It seems like it's Oxycontin, basically.
Yeah, that's what they call
Space
it.
Oxycontin.
But it's some kind of like fuel source or something that they're using for their guns or something.
Yeah,
like that.
But then it's also a drug,
right?
That you can like huff or inject or something. Yeah.
It starts out and they start this business venture for microphones, which is just such a funny business venture. They're wearing T-shirts as they're running away from these mobsters that they've used money from. And I guess he's kind of pulled Mickey into his scheme.
Mickey kind of fucked himself over more in the book, because in the book it was like betting on him, and he was this like skilled athlete in this tournament, and like Mickey bets against him, and that's why Mickey loses all this money, and Mickey owes all this money, but it's just Mickey, not him. Whereas here, they're in it together, and sets them up to betray Mickey later on.
And then as they're signing up to leave, which the planet Earth stuff that we see is like just a normal occurrence for like sand tornadoes to go across the sandstorms to like shut down.
I did like the subtle work they were able to do to sort of talk about like how fucked up Earth is without.
Yeah, which is like maybe not that far away from real life if we don't get our shit together, which is really upsetting. And again,
I did think it was also quite on the nose that a lot of Marshall supporters wear like red hats with a slogan on them.
I noticed that. I definitely noticed that one. And yeah, they're quite passionate about him possibly watching the broadcast, the live newscast.
Notice me. It's a bunch of like cultish followers who are like just blindly obsessed. Yeah.
We see Steven Yeun's character, Timo, like kind of swindles his way into being a pilot very quickly. He's like cool and suave. And then Mickey's trying to get on board. And then we see the kind of situation where he's just signing up for something that maybe he doesn't fully understand. He's just, signing on the dotted line, and he wants to become an expendable to get on the ship to get out of there.
Not even debatably that he doesn't understand it. He hasn't even read it. He admits he hasn't read it. He fully doesn't understand what he's getting himself into. Yeah.
All right, so continuing the plot here, Mickey 17 returns to the spaceship and meets the recently generated Mickey 18, who is more aggressive. As the expedition's leader, politician Kenneth Marshall has vowed to kill any multiples, simultaneously living clones. Mickey 18 tries to kill Mickey 17, who resists, suggesting that the Mickeys live by secretly rotating duties, meals, and deaths. Mickey 18 then tries to kill Timo, but is interrupted and leaves with Nasha. Mickey 17 is brought to dinner with Marshall, his wife Ilfa, and security agent Kai. Mickey 17 suffers severe pain after being served experimental meat and being treated with experimental painkillers. Kai intervenes to stop Marshall from executing Mickey 17. Kai later woos Mickey 17, who flees. Nasha learns of the Mickeys and accepts them both. Kai discovers the Mickeys and goes to report them. Nasha stops Kai, who asks Nasha to let Kai have Mickey 17. When Mickey 17 informs Mickey 18 what happened at dinner, an enraged Mickey 18 decides to kill Marshall. Mickey 18 finds Marshall at a public ceremony commemorating a piece of Niflheim rock. Chaos ensues when two young creepers emerge from the rock. Mickey 17 arrives and captures Creeper Zoko. Creeper Luco is killed by Kai and other security agents after Luco jumped on Marshall. Nasha stops Mickey 18 from killing Marshall, who discovers the multiples. Mickey 17, Mickey 18, and Nasha are arrested.
First off, I want to give a shout out to Cameron Britton, who's playing the scientist here. The voice, I heard the voice and I was like, where do I know this guy from? And I literally spent like 15, 20 minutes in the movie trying to rack my brain as I'm watching. And I realized finally, like, he kept coming back and having like a couple more lines, that he's Ed Kemper from Mindhunter, the guy who plays Ed Kemper. And
I didn't realize that.
Did you not? Yeah. He's the guy who plays Ed Kemper. And I was like, oh, that's where I know the voice from, because it's very distinct, right? Very
Looks
different kind of character here. He's super tall, though, and you can see it now when you look at it. He's a huge guy. An interesting scientist character who my wife and I were discussing, like, how on board is he? Because he's definitely, like, willing to do all this stuff, but, like, there were also times where he would, like, give a face like maybe he didn't approve of it, but he was willing to do it regardless.
He seemed conflicted. He seemed supportive of what Dorothy's doing with her ventures to figure out if there's sentience with these creepers. And I don't know. So I think he's conflicted, but goes along with it. So, at the end of the day, that's the kind of scenario you can find yourself in if you follow a pseudo-dictator type.
Yeah. Anyway, I just wanted to highlight that was an interesting performance here, and that if you were wondering, like me, where you knew that voice from, that's where. I also want to talk about the creepers design, because there's a definite effort on the part of the filmmakers here to make them cute, especially the babies, to make them cute. They soften the features. They make them make cute noises. They behave in kind of adorable ways. This is to me, like, there was an overall attempt to take the aliens and make us, like, empathetically feel something for them in the same way that we feel like baby animals are cute. That way, you don't have to do the work of, like, rationally deciding for yourself that these are sentient beings that need to be respected, because you emotionally care about them and want them to not be harmed. And when one gets killed brutally, and that brutality is really amped up, it was like a very uncomfortable moment for a lot of people in the theater. It felt like you were watching, like, a puppy die. And I think they directly tried to do that. And like, I can see why you do that as a filmmaker. It's like a shorthand. But it also kind of short circuits the argument a little bit, because it's like, would you have cared about these creepers if they weren't cute? And I think that's a fair question. And like, I like the book's approach, because the creeper storyline plays out very differently, but like, it asks us to care about them just because they are sentient. And the way that they interact shows that sentience. And it highlights the fact that we are the aliens in this situation. The humans are the aliens invading their homeworld. But they kill humans in the book, and they don't really understand why it matters. They don't have the same affection for like versions of themselves because they live in this like hive mind. And the whole situation with the aliens is very different here. And here instead we have seemingly a mother caring for her baby. It's something very recognizable, kind of human in a way, or at least identifiably animal. And it really is able to emotionally attach us to this version of the alien to where we are rooting for them. How did you feel about that change? And do you get what I'm getting at with it?
I'm with you. No, I'm with you. I think you are taking out a layer of intrigue that is asking people to question what they think of as like sentient humanity. And I think that that's inherently something that was there in the story. I think it's a really interesting concept.
Yeah. It's an interesting sci-fi concept that is maybe a little heady.
I just think that it turned into a shorthand situation. It's something that he just didn't have time or want to really dig into. Yeah. And I will say, like, it feels in keeping with a Bong Joon-Ho movie to make a cute animal creature that's going to interact in this way too, to an extent. Like,
admittedly, he made him cute, but they were still kind of gross. So it wasn't like they were fully cute. You know, they were still kind of gross.
The mother one is like quite terrifying at times with the ways that it can like come apart and become
They're
very
kind
alien.
of Lovecraftian in the way that they look once they
Absolutely.
like open up. Yeah. When they open up a screen, it's hilarious. By the way.
Small ones can do that as well, but like it's not shown until certain.
But there's some moments where it's like playing with there's like a saber they're playing with, and they get into some like almost, you made me think of honestly like the Star Wars, what were those little shits that were on like
Ewoks?
No, Luke Skywalker's world in like one of the later movies.
The Porgs. Yeah.
The Porgs, like they had some Porgish moments, and it was like, we want you to think they're cute, you know?
It's like slapsticky stuff that like slide off of things, fall off things. They're clumsy baby kind of creatures, and like you said, yeah, they're meant to be something that people, you know, you want to buy a stuffed animal of that, like after the fact. And I think like shorthand for that. Also, like creature design is something big in film where it's like you really want to sell people on like an interesting creature, something that they like to see.
They
the
were
design
definitely
of.
interesting. It probably works better. I will fully grant, like it probably works better. It's just a difference I noticed, and it leaves me thinking, like, just sort of pondering how we have to sort of tie into empathy in this more direct way to make sure people care about them, to tell the story the way we want to tell them, because like humans struggle to care about things if we don't see something in them that we want to care about.
Yeah, and it's also like I can see Bong making it a lot of this more of a one-to-one for Earth, like something more recognizable for Earth. Like you see the political landscape looks more similar to our current scenario. Yeah. Some of the animal stuff like we're talking about here, like just like more familiarity. And I wonder if that was like an intention just to make it more accessible in a sense too. Yeah. Like I hate to think that like a director is sacrificing vision and intrigue for accessibility in a sense, but at the same time, like I don't want to be elitist about it, like and say like this needs to be hard for people to comprehend and for it to be a good movie.
Yeah, I don't know if it's necessarily difficult. It just asks a level of abstraction that maybe not everybody wants to do.
Yeah, I think it loses a layer there, but overall, I think it was fun. I think it's something that I still appreciated the creatures. I think there were like plenty of times where they were intimidating and like kind of scary when they're getting into the end of the movie where they're like kind of all working together. But yeah, and to strip away the hive mind aspect of it as well, they seem to not be a hive mind.
It's more about this mother who's like trying to be protected and is sort of the leader of them. Let's talk about Mickey 18, because this is another very interesting change here. As you hinted at, there are some implication that there might be some data loss at different times. They're playing very fast and loose with this printing process. Someone's tripping over cords at one point.
Well, it's funny when they forget to put the platter out to like catch him.
But then like later on, they also do it and
times.
don't even care to catch him. He just falls on the ground.
They just get to the point where they're like, I mean, he's expendable. Why does it matter? And honestly, like you could see people not valuing that life as much, and if they don't, then this kind of stuff happens. And like some of the scientists get to that point, and I think Dorothy and maybe the lead scientist we've talked about, maybe they're still like, what the hell, this is still a person.
Yeah, I don't know, because like I feel like the Ed Kemper character I'll just call him that. It's not really fair, but what's his name? Cameron Britton. At times he seems to have some qualms, but like he also is like on board for a lot of it. He's the voice who's like asking him to describe how it feels as he's dying from radiation. He's leading a lot of these experimental things. So I don't want to like fully forgive this guy because he definitely seems like he's not very ethical. I just think there are moments where he shows a little bit of restraint in the face of what Marshall's asking him to do, or at least like hesitation. I don't know.
So there's this like public kind of display game show vibe, like late night show that Marshall's putting on, which I don't even know if we need to dig into Marshall much more, other than like how bombastic that performance is. So crazy.
And that moment I do want to touch on because it's so bombastic and over the top, but it's so interesting that this was filmed 3 years ago. And yet apparently there is a scene where Mickey 18 comes in, tries to assassinate Marshall, and instead nicks him. And in the scene, there's also like a borderline Nazi salute happening, I think. Yeah. It's crazy to me that this all happened 3 years ago. Unless this was done in reshoots or something. I don't know. It's pretty wild.
It's possible. I mean, the film was delayed, and I couldn't find a ton of information as to why. Like, some people said like there was like editing, like additional editing that they wanted to do or something like that. There's stuff that we just don't know because it's behind the scenes.
Did they predict the assassination attempt?
I don't know. But then we see Mickey 18. You're kind of touching on him as well, and like while he, like, we see this scene where he gets enraged and he's like, "Fuck Marshall," and like the way that he's different, which
he tried to kill Timo. He's like murderous from the start. That's something 17 points out. He like wants to kill 17. He definitely wants to kill 17 more than I think 18 does in the book. They have like a discussion about it, and they have like a rational discussion about like, I've only been alive this long. You've been alive longer. Therefore, it makes sense and it's more fair. And like, there's all this. Whereas 18's just like, I'm gonna fucking kill you, and like, I'm gonna win this, and you don't get. You're pathetic. I hate you.
18 in the book was like kind of lazy, and here he's just like a murderer. Which I honestly do think it's a fun change. It was 8
in the book versus 18, but I felt like he didn't. I felt like 8 and 7 were just felt pretty fundamentally like the same person. It just so 7 had some experiences that 8 didn't have. But otherwise, at the core, they are the same person. Here, there was a heavy implication, and we get this highlighted by just a brief line from Nasha where she talks about, or it's even, I think it's something that Mickey is reporting that Nasha told him. And that's that different versions of himself had like different personalities, and some of them emphasize different parts of his personality more than others. And so that shows that there is variation with these iterations. And that's something that wasn't clear in the book, at least for me. So that implies that 18 could just be different because sometimes they come out a little different.
I think it's cool too to see in a film that you're going to have an actor portray multiple versions. Like, it's cool to have it not be very similar and have it be quite different. Them playing off of each other there's a bit of heart that comes in as we get to the end of the film where, like, I wasn't expecting the Mickeys to care for each other in the way that they do, to care about each other, because they're so like blasé about most of it up until that when we get there. But I just think like having a character who's like kind of murderous on a spaceship is a cool twist to this film, and he goes and tries to take out Marshall. They massacre the Creeper, which was a very sad scene. Mm-hmm. There's also another, like, there's a gore element here. Like, there's like the puking of the blood and the which we're getting into the dinner scene now, but that Creeper was just blown apart. Yeah. The blood from his arm when he got cut off.
Chainsaw Man, and the arm getting chopped off and floating by the window.
Which is kind of a Bong Joon-Ho hallmark. I think that's like something that shows up in his films. I've seen interviews and things like that of him reacting to some of this violence, and he seems to like look at it with glee. So there's something about that that's like, he's not taking it to be this like hyper aggressive, like mean thing to be taken seriously. It's like it's kind of a joke, and like how ridiculous can this be?
I'm with him, man. Like, I mean, someone who likes action movies, like, I think that sometimes people can get like twisted into knots, sort of feeling bad about violence in film and like how it's portrayed, and like it is worth analysis, absolutely. But I think there is space, in my opinion, for the action movie genre to have a little bit of fun with the violence.
Well, even just outside of action, like, I think a lot of genres are welcome to that.
Sure,
I think it's like
horror does the same thing,
and it's absurdity though. Like, I like absurdity in my storytelling in general.
We're in like a hyper version of reality. Like, you recognize when you're watching this movie that this is a it's an elevated form here that's trying to say something, and elevated in the sense that it's not our reality. So one thing you brought up with the dinner that I wanted to touch on is this character Kai. I think this is there's a character in the book. I don't think her name was Kai, but it's something similar.
Cat.
Cat, yeah. So this is a version of the same character. And while they did give her a little more to do here, I still felt like I didn't understand this character. She at times behaves in ways that are contradictory, and I just wonder if there was like different versions of this character present at different points in time in the script, and something happened with rewrites or something. Because like I couldn't really track her. I couldn't track her motivation. At one point, it seemed like they were implying that she had a romantic relationship with her roommate. And maybe she did. Maybe it was an open thing because she talks about being open. She's attracted to 17. It seems like romantically. But it seems like that immediately, like the emotional connection is traded instead for something physical, as she doesn't seem to care as much. And she's like, I can have one, you can have the other. I don't know. It gets a little weird. And then also like the way she interacts with Marshall, and at times she seems like, she's like, am I just a uterus to you? Which I thought was like a powerful moment. But then like she kind of goes back on it and seems to be kind of a believer in the cause. I don't know. I just felt like the character was a little confused, and I could never really get like a beat on her.
I get that. Yeah, I can see that. I think she's also like a character that in the book we wanted to see expanded some, and then kind of didn't get expanded a ton here.
Not a ton. Yeah. Well, and spoiler for the book, but she in the book she signs up to be the new Expendable. So a lot of her character, the little bit of character development that is present, is to set her up to want to take his position. Because she is now she's worried about death. Her roommate died, and so she's like, I've been thinking about death a lot, and I think about immortality. And she's willing to take on Mickey's role. And that's why they're willing to kill off the Mickeys, because they're going to have the new Expendable and with her. That's not in this movie. So it also like kind of leads the character a little bit afloat at the end. Like, what was her point?
It does sound like Marshall wanted her to be used for clones to like populate a very specifically bred population when they get there.
Yeah.
Or when
again, we're touching on
like
it's like we're focusing on that social aspect of it, right? Like the control over reproduction that Marshall's obsessed with, and wanting to go forth and spread the seed and all this stuff. Yeah.
That dinner scene is wild when he's eating that fake meat. It is disgusting looking.
Yeah, sure.
Like with the sauces, and this is where we can talk about the sauce.
The sauces, yeah.
There's a thing about food that's touched on in this. They're eating like slop for the most part, the general workers. And then he's invited to this dinner, 17 is, and he's like, I'll go. This it's worth it for the food. And then we're seeing this like piece of meat. It's covered in a nasty.
Well, he like won a random contest supposedly.
Yeah. We know that it wasn't random. They pulled him in.
But that's the idea, is that Marshall does this on occasion.
It's covered in sauce. And specifically, I think it said like sauce is what makes food worth eating or something like that. Something along those lines. And I think that is like there's a hierarchy or like a social kind of hierarchy that's on display here, where they're saying like, we have money. We put sauce on things to make it taste good. You guys eat slop. And like the way that like those are all tied together. And then her motivation for like wanting to, she's literally willing to massacre these creatures later. Yeah. At like a full genocide on these creatures to get sauce.
Again, it's like a little, they're both just so over the top. And like, I recognize we have over the top villains in our real life now running shit. I don't know. It's interesting in a movie how it plays though, because it's
the sauce isn't meant to be taken literally. I think that the point is these powerful and rich people may be willing to do much worse or something as bad as genocide on a population for something as simple as sauce. Yeah. And I think that's like telling. And I think as we move along here, this really does kind of become like a working class revolution. And like that's what I think the film is like ultimately trying to come back around to, and this idea of like saving ourselves and saving what we have left, like our natural earth or our natural resources. These entities are their natural home on Niflheim, like not obviously terraforming and taking things that otherwise weren't ours. And I think that's kind of at the heart of what this movie is getting to. So Numerous creepers arrive outside the ship, calling out to Zuko. In the brig, Mickey 17's description of the creepers helping him makes Nasha realize they are not hostile. Timo tries to kill one Mickey to satisfy the loan shark, but Nasha and Mickey 18 foil this. The Mickeys and Nasha are brought to Marshall, who wants to kill the creepers. Marshall destroys Mickey's stored memories, while Nasha saves Zuko from death. Elpha and Marshall's assistant Preston persuade Marshall to task the Mickeys to compete in collecting creeper tails, with the winner being allowed to live. The Mickeys are forced to wear remote detonated bomb vests to ensure their compliance. When the Mickeys are sent out, they peacefully seek out the creepers' leader, which prompts Marshall to go outside himself with a security team intending to personally kill the creepers. Using a translation device, Mickey 17 communicates with the creepers' leader, informing on Marshall's plan. The creepers' leader threatens to kill all humans unless Zuko is returned alive and one human is killed in recompense for Luco's death. Mickey 17 communicates to Nasha via camera. She realizes the need to free Zuko. Nasha takes Elpha hostage to ensure Zuko's release. Nasha releases Elpha, who tries to kill Zuko, but Nasha again saves Zuko. The security agents arrest Elpha. Nasha returns Zuko to the Creeper's leader, while Mickey 18 fights Marshall. Mickey 18 detonates the bomb planted on his vest, killing himself and Marshall to fulfill the demand by the Creeper's leader. In the aftermath, Ilfa commits suicide in a psychiatric ward, while Preston and other Marshall conspirators are in prison. An associate of the loan shark tries to kill Timo, but Timo kills him instead. Nasha is later elected as a colony political leader. She officiates a groundbreaking ceremony on Niflheim where Mickey 17, now Mickey Barnes, detonates the cloning device to symbolically end the Expendables program.
Some big changes from the book for sure. We see Mickey 18 go out in sort of a blaze of glory. I think it's an interesting sort of moment worth commenting on, that Mickey has to violently take down Marshall. This isn't like some nonviolent answer was found. This isn't a movie advocating for a nonviolent revolution. This is a violent revolution that occurs.
It's a violent revolution in service of peace.
Well, and I think you could see in the situation that, like, Marshall, that sometimes it's like the only thing that is going to work with these people is violence. Like, it's like they're committing violence against you, and I don't know. I've just never been able to like fully wrap my head around a nonviolent philosophy when it comes to being oppressed. Like,
yeah. Well, I would love to. I would love to.
Yeah,
but
I would love to too, but it's just not how it works.
Yeah.
Like, it's just, you have to be able to answer it in kind, and you have to be careful. Sure, like there's a lot of great messaging about you have to be careful not to fall into the same traps. And I think that's totally true. But also, I think the tendency towards nonviolence can be used against people to keep them oppressed.
And like I said, it turns into this, like we see.
There's a rebellion. It seems like this rebellion has been sort of happening behind the scenes.
I think brewing.
Yeah, there's some like knowing looks given between characters. He doesn't have to do a whole lot to establish it that like this was some sort of plan that was going on outside of the bounds of this movie. Like, we haven't known about this, but it's been happening.
What do you think of the moment where the creeper is asked how it knows Mickey's name, and it says it's a secret?
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know that we have a good answer for how it could know his name.
Yeah, because in the book, the ocular is how he's
from
able
Mickey
to
6 rather than it would be 16 here, but we didn't get any of that.
So how does the creature know Mickey's name in that moment? I don't know. Is it meant to be some unexplainable thing? Is there something that we're missing?
Is there some sort of psychic connection? We don't have any dreams here. We don't have any of the dreams.
We do have one dream at the end, which is weird.
But not
one
with
that
the creepers, though. Yeah.
Right, and that's another thing. We'll leave that one for now. If you think
let's
of an
leave that.
answer
I want to talk
secret.
about that towards the end here. Yeah. Do you have any theories about how this mother creeper could know the name?
Like you said, the only thing I can rationalize is maybe a psychic connection between the babies that were taken. Outside of that, like I don't really know any other way that's possible, unless the hive mind thing is still, there is somewhat of a hive mind. Although, and this would lead some credence to that, because they do react when the tail is cut off, when one of them is killed. All the rest of them react.
True,
all
they
at the
all
same
react.
time. So
yeah, that might be leaning into like there's some sort of shared consciousness going on here. Yeah, that might be the answer there. Yeah, because the baby had already been attacked a little bit here, to where and if the mother one knows what the baby knows, would know about Mickey. That could be.
I guess that's the answer. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we end up with this whole side story where like Timo is like trying to kill one of the Mickeys for the loan shark, and all that stuff is coming back around. I thought this was interesting. I think it was cool to give Steven yet another thing to do in the film, but ultimately, like, they outsmart him. 18 specifically outsmarts him, and then they take him down and kind of capture him, only to then be captured by Marshall's people. And then we lead into the scene where the creeper is hooked, and then, like, at the last second, Nasha jumps and grabs it in her mouth, and she's left, like, incapacitated for the time being, just to save this creeper. And then drama ensues. The Mickeys have to go outside with the bombs on their back, which is reminiscent of the original story where they had the bombs.
Somewhat. Quite different, though. They play very fast and loose with the idea of translation here. I don't know if it's just from, like, all of our time we spent covering Arrival.
Yeah, totally.
The idea that you could develop a translator seemingly based off of the weird noises that Mickey is making.
Yeah, I mean...
They can develop a rough translator that is somehow going to work. Like, it's almost beyond ludicrous, but, like, again, we haven't been taking the tech too seriously here, so don't think about it too much.
It's also future tech, not modern day tech like Arrival, so we can, I guess, say maybe,
but it just seems, that seemed like kind of unbelievable to me that they would be able to develop this technology so quickly. But okay, we can let it slide a little bit. I also wanted to touch on, before we leave it behind, because I know we want to talk about that dream sequence, because that's an interesting part, but I wanted to touch about on Manakova. I think it's the same character. I know that we see Manakova tech as, like, the tech of the printer. And that's referring to this character from the book. And then they have this flashback moment where he talks about the serial killer who gets caught. That was also Manakova, right?
I think so. Or at least a stand-in for the same kind of story.
I just can't remember if it was literally the guy. I can't remember.
I don't know if the name was the same, but clearly, like, what happens is
he was, like, the creator of the tech, though, right? Like, in the movie?
One of the creators, it seemed, or one of the people who were on a board or something like that was misusing the tech. I don't know if he was this. So I think it was, like, fundamentally changed because, like, Manakova created this army that, like, was then, like, foresaw all the things that were going to come up against them, and then they barely beat this guy.
Yeah, whole different, like, very interesting chapter in the book that is definitely quite different in the sense that this version of it doesn't go nearly as far.
I kind of like the serial killer one, though, too, in this film. Like, right. I think it's a fun way to take it. I'm clearly not as big and heady of a sci-fi talk. Yeah,
I loved that chapter, but, like, it would have been a big thing to get into, potentially.
But this serial killer thing is interesting, too, because it's like, yeah, I mean... a murder that keeps happening from the same person because of all
it highlights some interesting ethical conundrums that we get into, because they're like, who do we punish? Do we punish all of them? Do we divide the sentence up? Do we assign them all equally? Yeah. And
then ultimately we see the end of this arc with Mickey 18, where, like, he's started to stand up for Mickey 17, started to protect him, and then ultimately at the end he's the one who's like, the creature wants a death. The creeper wants a death as recompense, and he's there to take down Marshall and like punching him in the face and sacrifices himself.
Though, because he also sacrifices himself, so that we got multiple deaths here. Also, I feel like there was, like, a couple other people on that thing when it blows up, but maybe not. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe.
What was that one? There was that one, like, preacher guy, because that was an interesting character too. He's almost the Musk type character in some way, but maybe more tied in with the religion. Who's, like, kind of manipulating everything going on with Marshall from some sort of from the shadows.
Very Grima worm tongue of him, yeah.
Sure.
And he was very clearly manipulating the hell out of Marshall,
absolutely, like whispering to him, "Oh, you're gonna be so beloved. I can already see it in the history books," and
manufacturing moments of epicness for this, like, figure,
feeding
and stuff
into his narcissism. Yeah. Sure. I feel like he got blown up, right? was he not on the thing when it exploded?
I'm not sure.
I don't remember seeing him at the end, although maybe he was in prison. Maybe they captured him.
I think that's what it was. Yeah.
And I've only seen this movie once, so I couldn't tell you.
So another unexplained thing I mentioned before, the secret thing, which I think maybe we came to the conclusion. But there's dreams that are baked into the book. Like, throughout, Mickey 7 is saying, "Hey, I had a bunch of dreams."
Communications with the creepers.
Part of the reason why he doesn't want to back up his memory. And here, at the very end of the film, almost as a holdover from the source material, it said that Mickey's like, "I've always had weird dreams," and he has, like, in the moment, I guess right before that, he has this moment where we think it might be real.
It's supposed to be like while he's at this unveiling. And they're asking him to push the button, which is something that we've referred to a couple times about. Unclear whether or not this button press actually affected the crash that, like, killed his parents or his mother at least. And he has this dream, and in the dream, Marshall is printed out. Alpha is there. Unclear. Maybe she was also printed out because he's like, "I thought you killed yourself. Why are you here?" That's also kind of him realizing it's a dream. But she is there and, like, being ominous. She wants him to, like, to drink the sauce that has like dripped
Yep.
on the ground, which is like clearly blood. Interesting dream sequence seems to imply that Marshall is living on through this technology, but then we snap back to the present. That's not actually occurring, and we blow up the machine. At least that's what the movie seems to be purporting. Like, what is your read on this sequence, and what does it mean?
Yeah, great question. This is why I was bringing it up as another thing that I couldn't really necessarily explain, because it felt to me like something that was a holdover possibly from another.
It almost felt like this was an alternate ending. We're gonna have him have a flash of an alternate ending.
I think like part of it is maybe a commentary on how like even though these villains have been defeated, there are other people that will manipulate the system and take advantage of others and things like that, and they will crop up again, and to be wary of that.
Like, this technology still exists, even if we're destroying this device. It doesn't mean that it's completely eradicated.
It's supposedly being banned throughout the universe,
Supposedly.
yeah. But yeah, I mean, it existed, so it's like, can you eradicate any
A
technology?
backup of Marshall could exist somewhere. This is something that could theoretically happen.
I guess it could happen, but like the emphasis on the sauce again makes me think that like wanting you to drink the Kool-Aid, drink the sauce, drink this thing that makes you one of us, that, and like trying to, I don't know, lure him in some way, or make some commentary on, you know, the differences in the socioeconomic sort of factions and the way that they can be pitted against each other, and often are, and how I don't know, that can be haunting in ways. But I did think it was strangely tacked on. I felt this one was hard to, maybe it's there for interpretive effect, maybe I don't necessarily on one viewing know exactly what it's meant to be there for, but it did feel like something that I was confused by.
Yeah, it's like implying there's a certain undying nature to this form of evil, if you want to call it that, form of ignorance, and it can be perpetuated by this technology. And like in some ways, this movie is also about like the creation of a technology that maybe like the scientific community is able to produce. And much like big tech, you often see doing stuff like this, where it's like the technology is being accelerated and raced into before the implications are fully considered. And in fact, they are like deliberately not considered. I talk about generative AI and the way that's been unleashed on society, and how its ramifications are still being considered even as we're all living in a reality of it, right? And that it kind of, to me, is hinting at that, of like this technology has outpaced our ethics here, and you know, even if you might start to think of the ways we could use it, it's also showing the ways in which it could be misused and abused, obviously, throughout this movie.
Yeah, and I think that's a danger of technologies. Like most technologies could be used to abuse and manipulate others, and so it's about like regulation, or just being kind of aware of the things that are the levers of control that can be implemented against,
as we introduce new technologies that enable us to live our lives in new ways and open up new avenues of experience. You're also opening up new avenues of oppression and new avenues of power that can be used to control. You have to keep in mind both as you pursue one, because you're doing it. People who tend to be inventing these things, not thinking about the ramifications of them in a negative light. They're thinking more about the positive.
They're trying to do it for the betterment of mankind. I would think most are.
But like I see a lot of like the sentiment about like why it's like there's like a thing. It's like why are you know, engineering majors forced to take classes in humanities, and it's like, this is the reason why.
Yeah.
Need to,
Ethics, philosophy,
yeah.
Good things to note, to
Something we need
be
to
aware
think
of.
about, yeah.
All right, well, this has gotten to the point where we need to do the thing that we do around here. I'll start.
Okay.
I like Bong Joon-Ho so much as a filmmaker. I think this movie is a little messy for a Bong Joon-Ho film. I think that there was like things that he wanted to explore, and there's just like only so much time in the day. As much as I really like that Edward Ashton story, I just feel like what Bong Joon-Ho brings to this story is like a tone that I appreciate, like to my own sensibilities. I think that he gets great performances. He makes some really smart changes, and like kind of hones in on something that does feel very timely. Also, maybe a little too, like I said before, close to home. Maybe it's hitting at a weird time and it'll be remembered more fondly or less fondly because of when it's coming out. But I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt here that like this had been a process that had been started long ago of things that he wanted to hone in on. And I do like, for general audiences and for myself, I like stories of working class uprisings against fascist seeming regimes and at least over powerful kind of dictatorship situations. And it's like a classic sci-fi premise of like, these people rebelling. It takes a weird route to get there, which I like weird. I've said that many times on the podcast, but ultimately I appreciate it for what it was. And I remember both of these fondly as like a fun, weird concept. And one thing I'll note too, that I should have mentioned much earlier, this movie is not doing well at the box office. So if you were interested, I highly recommend going and checking it out, just because like it's going to be bonkers. It's going to be weird. But it might do something for you if you like sci-fi, and if you made it through this far through the conversation, it might be.
We didn't even touch on. I was gonna say you got to go see it because there's a 3-way scene with two Robert Pattinson, and we didn't even touch on that moment.
Yeah,
a little different.
I was expecting it to be more graphic. I will say, like it was a little tame.
I bet there's a version that maybe exists that didn't end up making it to the movie, but
a little tamer than I thought it would be. But yeah.
But I will also say they do a good job of making it pretty uncomfortable. When Mickey 18 reaches over and starts like twisting the hair,
I definitely really
feel
hard.
like you can see how that would be very strange.
It would feel really fun scene. And like I said, kind of a hallmark. Last week I said like it's a hallmark of the story. I'm glad that it's here.
Yeah, and I thought it was kind of funny that they made them also both on drugs. Like Nasha's clearly on drugs when she's proposing this. It happens a little fast is the one thing that I will also say. Like Nasha just found out about this happening in this movie, and then she's immediately on board with this, whereas there was a little more time in the book where it's more like, oh, well, we're fucked anyway, we're probably all gonna get killed, I guess we might as well do this.
I think they played up her enthusiasm for it. She's on drugs.
That's true. And they also have established just how sexual their relationship is.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it was fun.
Yeah.
I agree. People should go see this movie. Book versus movie. I thought this was going to be a situation where a filmmaker like Bong Joon-Ho comes in, and this is sort of a landslide. Definitely the film. But I will say there's a lot of things I missed from the book. And I think this is a book where if you like this movie a lot and you have some questions about it and you want to explore some of these ideas a little more, I would definitely point people to the book because it provides a lot of that. And it really gets into the philosophical concepts, but in a very accessible way. Like, don't get me wrong, the book's not dry by any stretch. It's very pacey. It's very easy to read. And yet it explores some of this stuff a little more than the movie does. Ultimately, for a lot of the reasons we've laid out here, though, I think there were some smart changes. I like the social commentary, even if it was a bit of like a brick being thrown through a window. And sometimes there's it's a time to throw a brick for the window, so I can give him credit for that. Ultimately, I'm going to take the movie. It just was a lot closer than I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be a little more of a landslide. But I think both are good, and I definitely recommend people see this movie. But I also recommend they read the book.
Yeah, good analogy of brick through the window. And I do agree. It was closer than I thought it was going to be as well.
Yeah. All right. So we are going to be covering something exciting. So I guess stick around for the very end where we'll reveal our next exciting project, another new film. So if you're curious what that might be, stick around. But if you enjoyed our coverage of a Mickey 7/Mickey 17 book or movie or a combination of the two, let us know in the form of a rating and review on whatever app you chose to listen on. If you're on YouTube, make sure to like the video. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. We're creeping ever closer to 1,000. We would love to get there, 1,000 subscribers. And make sure to leave a comment because that helps boost us in the algorithm. Weigh in on how you felt about this movie, especially if you're someone who read the book. I'm really curious to know what book readers think of this movie.
Yeah, and be sure to connect with us on social media. We're on Facebook, Blue Sky, Instagram, TikTok. We're all over the place. And if you want, we also have a Discord. Just send us a message on any of those social media platforms or send us an email, inktofilm@gmail.com. And all of those social platforms are at inktofilm.
Right. Yeah. We'd love to have you on our Discord. We also have a Patreon, patreon.com/inktofilm, where we release monthly bonus episodes. Which is like alternate adaptations, different experimental episodes that we do from time to time. It's a good time over there. You can also vote on future projects. So if you want to affect what we will cover in the future, you're going to want to be on Patreon. All right, all that's left to do here at the end, man, is to announce our next project, which has got some big names attached to it. This is going to be our first Stephen King project of the year, I'm pretty sure.
I think so, yeah.
We are going to be covering The Monkey, directed by Osgood Perkins, which has like, an interesting connection on the podcast, but also like from Longlegs fame. We didn't cover that, but like people would know Longlegs and other things. And apparently this movie's doing pretty well. We've been hearing good things about it as being an interesting King adaptation. So we will be tackling both the short story and the film next week.
Yeah, I'm excited. We're on a roll with these new projects. I like this. We sometimes we get away from them and it'll be a few months, but we've done Nosferatu, we've done this film, Mickey 17, and now we're doing the Monkeys.
Yeah.
These are all like fresh off the presses.
Right.
I like it.
And if you're a fan of the Why the Book Wins channel, you'll be excited to hear that we are having Laura from that YouTube channel. She's joining us again for the Monkeys. She says she has thoughts that she wants to share with us, so I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too.
All right, until next time.
Keep adapting.